Family meetings were supposed to solve things, not end them. That was the thought running through my head the night my stepfather stabbed me. The Westin Heritage Hotel's private dining room shimmered under the warm gold of pendant lights, every surface gleaming with polished wood and wealth. My mother, Evelyn, had arranged the meeting as if it were a celebration. Silverware aligned perfectly, the oak table dressed in white linen wine, breathing in crystal decanters, but beneath all that elegance there was a tension I could feel pulsing like static through the air. Gregory Holt, my stepfather, sat at the head of the table as if he already owned the place. His cufflinks caught the light when he gestured toward the stack of legal folders beside his plate. He looked comfortable, too comfortable, like a man rehearsing his victory. My mother smiled, that brittle, practiced smile of hers, the one she wore at fundraisers and funerals alike. Across from them I sat upright, my father's old silver pocket watch resting inside my palm under the tablecloth. It was an old habit whenever I felt cornered. The watch had stopped years ago, its hands frozen at 7:48, the hour my father died. Gregory cleared his throat and raised his glass. I lifted mine out of politeness, though the wine burned in my throat. He spoke with that confident drawl he'd picked up from years of manipulating investors. "Clara," he said, "the board and I have agreed it's time for a change in leadership. The hotel needs direction." I blinked. "The board? What board?" He smiled wider. "A few members we've been working with. They're ready to sign off on a new management structure with me as acting president." I laughed once quietly, then opened the leather folder I had brought. Inside was my father's will, the document that named me as majority owner. I pushed it across the table. "You can't authorize anything, Gregory. This hotel was left to me. You're not part of the Westin line, and you never will be." His eyes hardened. "Your father may have built this place, but I built what it could become. The expansion plans, the brand deal's all me. You've been living off a man's empire you didn't build." His words hit harder than I expected. My mother said nothing. She stared at her wine glass as if the truth were floating inside it. I turned to her. "Mom, tell him this is insane." "You know what Dad wanted." She exhaled slowly. "Clara, please don't start. Gregory just wants what's best for the business." "Best for the business." The phrase twisted like a knife already. I felt the heat rise in my chest. "You mean best for himself. You think I haven't noticed the money transfers, the offshore accounts. You're selling pieces of this hotel like it's furniture." Gregory's smirk faltered for just a second. He reached for the folder, flipping through the pages with theatrical boredom. "You don't understand real business. You're a sentimental girl clinging to nostalgia." My jaw tightened. I stood up, steadying myself on the table. "Maybe so, but at least I don't need to steal someone else's legacy to feel important." The room went still. My mother's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. "Enough. Sit down, Clara. You're embarrassing yourself." Something inside me cracked. Years of restraint of being the dutiful daughter vanished. "No, Mom. You're the one embarrassing yourself letting this man rewrite everything Dad built." For a long second, Gregory's face stayed blank. Then he chuckled a dry, humorless sound. He picked up one of the folders and tossed it toward me. The papers scattered like white feathers. "Sign the partnership amendment, Clara, or I'll make sure you regret it." I didn't move. He reached into his jacket pocket. At first, I thought he was pulling out another contract. Instead, there was a glint of steel, a folding knife, the kind he used to open packages in his office. My breath caught. "You're not serious." He stepped closer. "If you won't give it, I'll take it." He lunged. The pain was instant, searing through my side like fire. The sound that left me wasn't a scream, but a gasp. My knees buckled. The wineglass fell from my hand and shattered on the floor. My mother stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth. She didn't move toward me. She didn't move at all. The smell of iron filled the air, mixing with the oak and the perfume. I pressed my hand to the wound, feeling the warmth spreading through my white blouse. The room tilted, the chandelier light fracturing into 1,000 gold shards. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Gregory breathing hard, muttering something about control, about how I had forced him. The world blurred at the edges. I tried to reach for the pocket watch, but it slipped from my fingers and hit the marble floor. The sound of it breaking was louder than the scream I never gave. Time stopped that night. I remember the silence more than the pain, the stillness that comes when everything you thought was permanent collapses. My mother finally moved then, but not toward me. She ran to Gregory, grabbing his arm, whispering his name in disbelief. I could barely hear her words over the ringing in my ears. Red pooled beneath me, dark and endless. The ceiling lights swam. Then there were footsteps, someone shouting from the hallway. Maybe a staff member had heard the noise. The last thing I saw was the shattered face of my father's watch, its broken glass reflecting the chaos around me. The second hand was gone. I thought about how he used to wind it every morning, tapping the glass twice for luck. I whispered something I'm not sure anyone heard. "Dad," it stopped. My body felt heavy, my lungs fighting for air. Then the world narrowed into a tunnel of sound. Sirens in the distance, radio chatter, the rhythm of my own heartbeat slowing under the noise. They say before you pass out, your brain tries to make sense of what's happening. Mine conjured the hotel lobby, the scent of lemon polish, and my father's laugh echoing down the hall. For a moment, I wasn't bleeding on the floor. I was 10 years old again, holding his hand as we walked past the fountain he loved. He had said, "Then buildings hold truth longer than people." Now I knew he was right. People lie, people betray. But the walls remember. The light above me flickered, dimmed, then went black. When I woke in the hospital, everything smelled like antiseptic and rain. It took days before I could move without feeling the stab again. Days before I could look down and see the scar and not remember the knife. The doctors said I was lucky that an inch deeper and it would have punctured my lung. Lucky was not the word I would have chosen. The wound had already been there long before that night, invisible but deeper. It began the day my father died. My father, Henry Weston, built the first Weston Heritage Hotel on a small piece of land overlooking Lake Travis. I grew up among blueprints and sawdust, running through half-finished hallways while he taught me to read space like a story. He believed that walls had memory. He would run his hand along the banister and tell me, "Buildings hold truth longer than people." At the time, I didn't understand. To me, he was invincible, a man who could summon beauty out of steel. My mother, Evelyn, was different. She liked what the business gave her, not what it meant. She liked the champagne dinners, the charity galas, the applause when she walked into the lobby wearing silk. My father smiled through it, but sometimes I caught the sadness in his eyes when she talked about expanding into Miami just because her friends had villas there. When I was 16, I remember watching him wind his silver pocket watch one evening. The lamplight made the metal glow. He handed it to me and said, "Keep it ticking no matter what stops around you." I never forgot that. It became the one piece of him I could carry. He died when I was 21, sudden heart attack. I was finishing my degree in hotel management at the University of Texas. One phone call and everything that had been solid collapsed. I came home to find my mother standing in the lobby, lipstick-perfect greeting guests while the paramedics wheeled his body through the back entrance. She didn't cry, not even at the funeral. The next few months blurred. I threw myself into learning the business, memorizing every contract, every floor plan. I wanted to honor him, to keep his legacy alive. My mother, though, seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She started hosting brunches again, laughing too loud, wearing colors too bright for mourning. That was when Gregory appeared. He came to the memorial as a friend of one of the investors, a man with a slick suit and a voice that could sell storms to the desert. He offered condolences, then quietly slid into our world like he'd always belonged there. Within weeks, he was advising on the hotel's strategic future. Within 6 months, he was living in the house. I remember asking my mother why everything had to move so fast. She said, "Because Gregory understands me." I wanted to ask if she even remembered my father's favorite quote about truth in buildings, but I kept silent. Gregory played his role perfectly. He talked about market trends and franchise models, and he treated me like a child sitting at the grown-ups table. "You'll learn someday," he would say with that patronizing smile. I hated him for it, but I hated myself more for how helpless I felt. I tried to reason with my mother, showing her reports my father had left about long-term stability. She brushed me off. "Gregory says we have to expand or die." It wasn't business. It was hypnosis. By the end of that first year, my mother had remarried, the ink on my father's death certificate barely dry. Gregory moved into my father's office, hung his own certificates on the wall, replaced the family photo with one of him shaking hands with investors. I stopped going in there. Every time I passed that door, I could almost hear my father's voice fading under Gregory's. When the new lawyer arrived, a young man named Scott from some corporate firm, I sensed trouble. He asked me to sign a few documents just to update ownership details. I read every word and refused. That was when I realized my mother and Gregory had hired him together. It was not about efficiency, it was about control. I began to notice small things. My access to internal financial reports suddenly required new authorization. My company email password stopped working. Staff who used to greet me now averted their eyes. I confronted my mother once after dinner. "Why are you letting him take over?" She sighed as if I were exhausting her. "Clara, you're too emotional. Business needs a steady hand. Gregory's been through this before. You're still young." Young! The word burned. I was 22 with a degree and a lifetime of hotel walls in my veins. But to her, I was still the child who needed supervision. I went upstairs, slammed the door, and took out the pocket watch. It had stopped the day he died frozen at 7:48. I thought about winding it again, but I couldn't. It felt wrong to move time forward without him. Over the years that followed, I tried to build bridges. I sent my mother proposals for renovation projects, sustainability reports, expansion models that honored the hotel's original design. Gregory dismissed every one. Too sentimental, he said. He was charming in public, ruthless in private. I overheard him once on the phone telling an associate that he would clean up the Weston mess. The Weston mess, that was me. The night before my 24th birthday, I found a new version of my father's will in the safe, except the signatures were different. My mother's initials, Gregory's handwriting on a witness line that should have belonged to the family lawyer who had retired 2 years earlier. My stomach turned cold. They were preparing to adjust the inheritance maybe through a trust. I confronted her again. "You can't do this." "Dad made it clear," she said quietly. "You don't understand how the world works, Clara. This hotel needs Gregory. We all do." That was the night I realized I didn't have a mother anymore. I had an opponent. From that moment, everything changed. I started documenting everything, emails, meetings, whispers. I didn't know then that the watch I kept carrying would one day shatter beside me on the marble floor, marking the end of their charade. But the seeds of that betrayal were planted long before the knife. They grew in silence, watered by greed and denial. My father had built the hotel on foundations of trust. They rebuilt it on deceit. I looked at the scar on my side, now, weeks after the attack, and realized it was only the visible version of what had been happening for years. Buildings hold truth longer than people he used to say. But even buildings can crumble if you let the wrong hands rebuild them. The first day I walked back into the Weston Heritage after the hospital, I could feel eyes on me. The scar still ached beneath my blouse, a reminder of what everyone pretended not to know. Gregory was already back in the office, acting as if nothing had happened, as if a stabbing could be swept under the Persian rug of good PR. My mother had called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. The staff had been told to stay silent to keep things professional. In Texas, money buys silence faster than fear. I tried to focus on my work, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. People whispered in corners, and when I entered a room, conversations died. It didn't matter. I had come to reclaim what was mine, even if I had to stand alone in the hallways my father built. That morning, Gregory announced a mandatory staff meeting. It was supposed to be about quarterly performance, but I could tell by the glint in his eye it was something else. The meeting was held in the main ballroom, the one with marble floors and the mural of the Texas Hill Country across the ceiling. More than 50 managers and supervisors gathered, murmuring quietly. I stood near the back, clutching a folder filled with my notes on the spa renovation project I'd been designing before everything fell apart. The plan wasn't just about profit. It was about honoring my father's vision using natural light, sustainable materials, giving guests a sense of peace, instead of spectacle. When Gregory saw me, he smiled all false warmth. "Clara," he said loudly, "I'm glad you decided to join us. I was just telling everyone how much potential this company has if we can modernize our leadership." My mother sat near the front, crossing her legs elegantly, a soft smile frozen on her lips. I took a seat, keeping my face neutral. After a few empty slides about growth metrics and brand realignment, Gregory gestured toward me. "Now," he said, "Clara's been working on some ideas for the spa remodel. I thought it'd be fun to let her present since she's been passionate about keeping her father's traditions alive. There was something venomous in the way he said fun. I should have refused, but part of me wanted to show them that I still belonged here. I walked to the front, plugged in my laptop, and began the presentation. My voice was steady at first. I showed renderings of skylights, courtyard gardens, a meditation wing overlooking the lake. A few people nodded interested. I talked about local sourcing, about honoring Texas craftsmanship. And then I felt the shift in the room. Gregory leaned back, whispering something to my mother. She laughed quietly. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat too long. Then Gregory clapped once slow and mocking. Your ideas are cute, Clara, but this isn't a hobby farm. We're running a global brand, not a yoga retreat. Laughter rippled through a few rows. My face went hot. I tried to respond calmly. It's not a hobby, Gregory. It's sustainability. Long-term guest retention. He cut me off. We don't need retention. We need growth. That's the problem with you. You think small. You think emotional. He looked around the room for support. Am I right? A few managers chuckled nervously, unsure which side was safer. My mother's voice joined in soft but slicing. He's not wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes you let your feelings get ahead of your judgment. My throat tightened. I looked at her. The woman who once brushed my hair before school now watched me unravel with detached amusement. You asked me to bring ideas, I said. I did. You don't have to like them, but you don't get to humiliate me. Gregory smirked. Oh, come on. No one's humiliating you. This is business. If you can't handle feedback, maybe you're not ready for leadership. Something inside me snapped. I remembered my father's voice. Buildings hold truth longer than people, but even buildings need someone to defend their foundations. Feedback isn't the same as mockery, I said louder this time. You can pretend this hotel is a corporation, but it's a family legacy. My father's legacy. Gregory's smile vanished. Your father's legacy died with him. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps. Someone dropped a pen. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it did, I said quietly when people like you started poisoning it. He stood stepping closer, towering over me. You think you can talk to me like that in front of my staff? Your staff? I repeated every word, shaking. They were my father's long before they were yours. He leaned in, whispering just loud enough for the front row to hear. Then maybe you should join him. My vision blurred. For a second I thought he might hit me. Instead, he turned to the audience, spreading his arms like a showman. All right, everyone, that's enough for today. Let's remember why we're here to make this hotel great again. Laughter, applause, dismissal. I stood frozen while the crowd began to disperse. No one looked at me. My mother brushed past without a glance, her perfume sharp and floral, the scent of distance. My legs felt weak, my face burning. I gathered my papers slowly, each one shaking in my hands. At the doorway, Mr. Langford, the oldest maintenance manager, paused. His uniform was faded, his eyes kind. He placed a rough hand on my shoulder. Your father would have been proud of that plan, he said softly. He had the same idea before he passed. Don't let them scare you off, Miss Clara. I tried to smile, but it came out broken. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded and left, disappearing down the corridor like a ghost of the old hotel. I stood there alone in the empty ballroom, staring up at the mural of rolling hills and blue sky. My father had chosen that scene because he said it reminded guests of freedom. Now it felt like a ceiling pressing down on me. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the silver watch. The glass was still cracked from the night of the stabbing, but I kept it with me anyway. The hands were stuck, refusing to move. I touched the broken face and whispered, I'm trying, Dad. My reflection stared back from the shattered glass, young, angry, afraid, but still standing. That night, I went home and cried until my throat hurt. Then I wrote everything down, the insults, the laughter, the exact words he used. It wasn't just for memory, it was evidence. Somewhere inside, I knew this wasn't over. They had turned my pain into a public performance. But they had also given me something stronger than shame. They had given me purpose. After the humiliation in the ballroom, something inside me shifted. I stopped expecting decency from them. The next weeks, blurred into quiet hostility. Gregory began cutting off my access to everything that mattered. My login to the financial dashboard stopped working. When I called IT, they said the request to deactivate my account had come from upper management. My office keycard was disabled for security updates. My phone extension disappeared from the staff directory. It was like watching myself being erased in real time. I confronted my mother one evening in the lounge where she sat sipping her nightly glass of Merlot by the fire. "They're locking me out of my own company," I said. She didn't look up from her tablet. "Gregory told me you've been emotional lately. Maybe some time away would help." I laughed bitterly. "Time away from my father's life work." She sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That sentence haunted me. Harder than what? Losing everything, pretending I hadn't been stabbed in that very building. People around the hotel began acting differently too. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Employees who once smiled now looked uneasy, avoiding eye contact. Rumors floated through the halls that I was unstable, that trauma had made me paranoid, that the board wanted me on a wellness leave. Gregory's poison was spreading faster than I could counter it. Every time I tried to defend myself, it sounded like an excuse. The isolation was calculated. He didn't just want control. He wanted to convince everyone I didn't deserve it. I started recording things. Texas law allowed one-party consent, so I used my phone, discreetly capturing meetings, phone calls, and late-night whispers through the office wall that connected our suites. Some nights, I sat in my car in the parking lot, scrolling through the recordings, listening to his voice slither through the speakers. "She's fragile," he'd tell my mother. "We have to protect her from herself." And my mother, her voice tired and detached, would answer, "Maybe you're right." The betrayal didn't even sound angry. It sounded resigned, like she'd already chosen his side long ago. I began to feel the weight of loneliness pressing on my ribs more than the stab wound ever had. One morning, I came in early to retrieve old project files from the archive room. My password had changed again. Gregory's assistant, a nervous man named Carl, intercepted me. Mr. Holt said to direct all design matters through him. His hands trembled as he spoke. "I'm sorry, Ms. Weston. I can't give you those files." I smiled tightly. "Then tell him he can explain that to my lawyer." Carl froze. "Your lawyer?" "Yes," I said, though I didn't have one yet. "And tell him I'm done pretending I don't see what he's doing." That night, I reached out to an old college friend, Marcus Lang, who had become a corporate attorney. When he answered, his voice was calm, confident, a sound I hadn't realized I missed. "Clara," he said, "I saw the news about the incident." "How are you holding up?" "Breathing," I replied. "Barely." We met the next day at a small cafe downtown. I told him everything from the stabbing to the fake board to the rumors spreading like wildfire. He listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, his expression darkening as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned forward. "You need to start documenting everything. Emails, statements, bank transfers. If he's siphoning money, there'll be a trail." "I already had some recordings," I told him. He nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep them secure. And Clara, don't underestimate him. Men like that don't stop until they're exposed." He almost killed me once I said quietly, "He's not done." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make sure he is." That night, I began building digital folders, labeling them meticulously. Finance, legal, personal witness. I felt like an archaeologist uncovering my own life. In the silence of my apartment, I would play the old recordings, each one confirming what I already knew, that I was alone. Sometimes I'd pull out the cracked pocket watch, holding it up to the light, remembering my father winding it with steady hands. The ticking had stopped years ago, but when I pressed my thumb against the glass, I could almost hear the echo. The watch became a compass, even broken, reminding me which direction was right. Weeks turned into months. Gregory's campaign of control grew bolder. He started forwarding official correspondence through his own email, signing my name beneath his statements. I discovered he had changed my position title from managing partner to consultant on the website. My salary was temporarily suspended pending review. When I confronted him, he smiled with fake concern. "Clara, this is for your own good. You need to recover. The board is worried." "The board?" I repeated. "You mean the ghosts you pay to agree with you?" He chuckled. Paranoia doesn't suit you." His words dripped with confidence, the kind that comes from knowing someone has power, and that you don't. I left his office, shaking fury clawing at my throat. The next day, I received an email from HR, a notice placing me on indefinite leave. I walked into my mother's suite holding the letter. "Did you know about this?" I asked. She looked up startled, but not surprised. "Gregory thinks it's best if you rest. Maybe take a trip. He's stealing everything I said. He's bleeding this company dry." She looked away. "Stop exaggerating. You've been through a lot." Through a lot, I almost laughed. "He stabbed me, Mom." Her eyes flickered, then hardened. "He said it was an accident." "Do you believe that—" "I believe my husband," she said, and those 4 words ended something sacred inside me. I felt the silence between us stretch wide, an ocean I could never cross again. When I left her office, I didn't cry. I just walked through the hotel lobby watching the staff bustle about, pretending everything was fine. Guests checked in, unaware that the marble floor had once been slick with my blood. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake, casting orange light across the glass facade. I stood there until it faded, until the hotel lights flickered on one by one, like stars in a world I no longer belonged to. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote in my journal, "They want to erase me. But I'm still here, and I remember everything." I glanced at the pocket watch on the table, its face fractured but gleaming under the lamp. The hands had not moved, but somehow that felt right. Time could wait. I would not. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, tucked neatly beneath my apartment door. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, elegant and deliberate, the same cursive she used on birthday cards when I was little. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper that smelled faintly of her perfume. The message was short. "Let's talk. I want us to fix things." Gregory promised to listen. Dinner at the Heritage Private Dining Room, Saturday 7 p.m. Family only. Love, Mom. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling both the pull of hope and the warning of instinct. The phrase family only twisted like a knife. After everything, she still used that word. Family. I called Marcus and read him the letter. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then he said carefully, "Do not go alone." "She says it's a peace talk," I told him. "Maybe she's finally seen through him." "Clara," he said, his voice low, "you don't need to forgive someone to win. You need to survive long enough to win." I promised I would be careful, but deep down, part of me still wanted my mother back. That was the weakness Gregory counted on. The next few days passed in a haze of nervous preparation. I packed the original copy of my father's will into a leather folder along with a flash drive containing all my recordings and evidence Marcus had reviewed. I labeled them in bold black marker, "In case." On Friday night, I met Marcus for coffee. He handed me a small envelope. "If anything happens," he said, "take this to Detective Bloom. It's everything we've got so far." I nodded, slipping it into my bag. "You really think they'd try something again?" He didn't answer right away. Gregory doesn't lose gracefully. And Evelyn's denial runs deep. Be ready for either of them. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the city lights shimmer over the lake and took out the silver pocket watch. The cracked glass caught the glow of the streetlights. I whispered, "Keep it ticking no matter what stops around you." It didn't tick, but I liked the illusion of hope. Saturday came heavy with humidity. Storm clouds lingered far off, the kind that make the air taste like metal. I spent too long choosing what to wear, finally settling on a white blouse and dark slacks, simple, neutral, non-confrontational. I clipped the pocket watch to my waistband, a ritual I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was courage. Maybe superstition. Before leaving, I sent Marcus a quick text, heading in. "We'll check in after." He replied instantly. "Be safe. Record everything." The drive to the hotel felt longer than usual. Every stoplight seemed to hold me hostage. When the hotel finally came into view, its glass facade glinting in the late sun, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I parked near the side entrance where the valets once waved to me by name. Now they just nodded polite and distant. The lobby looked as it always had, grand, timeless, indifferent. Tourists snapped photos of the chandelier. Guests laughed near the bar. No one could guess that beneath the polished marble lay cracks invisible to the naked eye. I rode the elevator to the top floor, my reflection fractured in the mirrored walls. My heart pounded harder with each passing floor. At the private dining room, I paused outside the door listening. Laughter faint and familiar. My mother's voice, then Gregory's deeper tone. I swallowed hard and knocked. "Come in," she called brightly. When I entered, everything looked almost identical to that night months ago. The same table, same candles, even the same brand of wine. The sight made my stomach twist. My mother stood and came toward me, arms outstretched. "Oh, sweetheart, look at you." She hugged me lightly, her perfume suffocating. Gregory rose from his chair, his smile too wide. "Clara," he said smoothly, "we're glad you came." I sat down opposite them, placing my bag on the chair beside me. "What's this about?" I asked. My mother sighed. "Gregory and I want to move forward. The hotel needs stability, and so does our family. We can't keep fighting like this." Gregory nodded. "You've been under stress, and we've all said things we regret." He reached for the wine bottle, pouring 3 glasses. I didn't touch mine. "You tried to kill me," I said quietly. The room went still. My mother's smile faltered. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "It was an accident. You startled him." I let out a hollow laugh. "Right. I startled him so badly he stabbed me in the side." Gregory leaned forward, clasping his hands. "You can keep holding on to resentment, or you can help us rebuild. The choice is yours." He slid a folder across the table. "Sign this partnership transfer. It's just a formality, gives your mother full management rights while you focus on recovery." I looked down at the papers. The words blurred, but I caught enough to know it was an ownership surrender. "This is what this dinner's about," I said. "You want me to sign away my inheritance?" My mother's voice sharpened. "It's not about money, Clara. It's about legacy. Your father would have wanted unity. My father would have wanted honesty," I said. Gregory's jaw twitched. "We've tried to be patient," he muttered. I pulled out the folder I had brought and laid it on the table. "This is my father's will, the original copy notarized. It leaves the majority of the shares to me. There is no legal path for you to take that away." His eyes darkened. My mother's hands trembled. "Where did you get that? From his personal safe? The one you didn't know existed?" Gregory exhaled sharply, then forced a smile. "No one wants to fight. Sign the papers, Clara, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll have a trust and allowance. You can travel live comfortably." I shook my head slowly. "You already took everything else." "You don't get my soul, too." For a moment, his mask cracked. I saw the fury beneath the charm. My mother's eyes darted between us. "Gregory," she said softly, "please." But he was done pretending. He stood the chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "I built this empire," he snapped. "You were just a child with a famous last name." I stood too, matching his stare. "Then why are you so afraid of me?" He moved around the table, his voice low and venomous. "Because you're in the way." The air seemed to thicken. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. My mother whispered, "Stop this, both of you." But Gregory didn't stop. He reached for my arm, gripping it hard enough to leave a mark. "You'll sign or you'll regret it." My voice came out steady, even cold. "I already do." I pulled free and stepped back, heart hammering. The tension snapped like a wire. For a second, the entire world seemed to hang in silence. The clink of glass, the hum of the air conditioner, the faint echo of rain starting against the windows. That was when I knew this wasn't reconciliation. It was another trap. "I'm not signing," I said, "and if you touch me again, I'll make sure every recording I have goes straight to the police." His eyes widened just slightly. "Recordings!" My mother gasped. "What have you done?" I lifted my bag and walked toward the door, protected myself. Behind me, I heard Gregory curse the sound of glass shattering. I didn't look back. The hall felt cold and endless as I left. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. The watch at my waist caught the light as I stepped into the elevator, its broken face flashing once like a warning. The dinner had been a trap, but I'd survived it. Again. And this time I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I woke to the sound of beeping and the sterile hum of fluorescent light. The air smelled like antiseptic and gauze, sharp and clean, in a way that felt foreign. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My mind clawed its way out of darkness through fog and pain until the pieces began to align. The white ceiling, the rhythmic pulse of a monitor, the dull ache under the bandages at my side. Hospital. Again. My lips were dry, and when I tried to speak, my throat burned. "You're awake," a voice said. A woman stepped into view wearing a Navy uniform, her hair tied neatly under a cap. She smiled kindly. "Detective Bloom," she said, showing her badge. "You're safe, Ms. Weston. You're at St. David's Medical Center. You've been out for 2 days." 2 days! The words hit me harder than the pain. "What happened?" I whispered. She pulled up a chair, her notepad already open. "You were found in the hallway outside the Heritage Hotel's dining suite. Severe blood loss trauma to the abdomen. Paramedics said you managed to call 911 before you lost consciousness." I frowned, trying to remember, but everything after the argument blurred into fragments. Gregory's face twisted with rage, the flash of steel, my mother screaming. Then nothing. "Gregory!" I said, my voice trembling. "He did it again." Bloom nodded slowly. "We know. He's in custody, for now. Claimed it was self-defense." Your mother backed his statement. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the bedsheet. "She said," that Bloom's eyes softened. "She said you attacked him first." I almost laughed, but it came out as a cough. "Of course she did." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing, Clara, someone tipped us off about some recordings, audio files. They were emailed to my department anonymously right after the incident. They contain conversations between your mother and Gregory discussing ownership transfer and coercion." My heart skipped. Marcus. He must have sent them when I didn't check in. I closed my eyes, relief flooding through the numbness. "You have them." She nodded. "We do. They're damning, but we'll need your official statement." I opened my eyes. "You'll get it. Every word." Bloom gave me a small approving smile. "Good. Rest for now. You're lucky to be alive." She stood and left the soft click of the door echoing behind her. Alone again, I stared at the IV line running into my arm, the clear liquid dripping rhythmically like seconds passing. Lucky. That word kept circling in my head. People called survivors lucky as if endurance was a prize. But lying there tethered to machines, luck felt like an insult. The door opened again. This time, it was Marcus. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, suit wrinkled. But when he saw me, his shoulders relaxed. "You're awake," he said, voice thick with relief. "You scared the hell out of me." I tried to smile, but it hurt. "You sent the files." He nodded. "You told me to if anything happened. You saved yourself before it even started." He pulled a chair close and sat. "Bloom's good. She's building a case. Between the audio, the forged signatures, and the financial trail Gregory's cornered, and my mother," I asked. His jaw tightened. "She's pretending she didn't know anything, but the recordings show otherwise. She knew about the offshore accounts, the loan fraud, all of it." I swallowed hard. "She'll lie. She always does." Marcus leaned forward. "Maybe, but this time she's lying to the wrong people. The DA's office already has the files. Gregory's bail is being challenged as we speak." I closed my eyes, the weight of the information pressing against my chest. For the first time in years, someone was fighting with me instead of against me. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he said gently. "You're still in danger. His lawyers are already trying to twist the story. They'll say you provoked him, that your mental health was compromised after the first incident. We need to stay ahead. They're using the same script I murmured. Rewrite history, erase the parts that don't fit." He nodded grimly. "That's why you need to rest. The media's going to find out soon, and when they do, you'll need to be ready." I looked at the window. The Texas sky outside was gray-heavy with the promise of rain. "I'm ready," I said quietly. "I've been ready since the first time he took something that wasn't his." Marcus exhaled, then smiled faintly. "That's the Clara I know." He stood. "I'll be back tomorrow with Detective Bloom. We'll take your full statement." After he left, the silence felt larger than the room. Machines hummed softly. Somewhere down the hall, a patient cried out, then the sound faded into the rhythm of footsteps. I turned my head toward the small bedside table. Someone, probably Marcus, had placed the silver pocket watch there. Its face was still cracked, but it glinted faintly under the fluorescent light. I reached for it, my fingers trembling from weakness. The hands hadn't moved. They were still frozen at 7:48. My father's death. The beginning of everything that led here. Buildings hold truth longer than people, he used to say. But people like Gregory had built their empires on lies. I pressed the watch to my chest and felt the faint echo of my heartbeat against the metal. For a second, it almost sounded like ticking. That night, sleep came in waves, each dream filled with flashes of light and voices. I saw my father's face calm and steady and my mother's turning away. I saw Gregory smiling as he signed false documents, as if betrayal were just another business strategy. When I woke again, the storm outside had broken. Rain streaked down the window, blurring the city lights. I thought about what Bloom said self-defense. The absurdity made me smile bitterly. He had stabbed me twice and they still gave him bail. That was the kind of justice money could buy. But evidence truth could still break through the armor of wealth. I made a silent promise to myself then. I would see it through. I would testify. I would tell every detail, every word, every scar. They could spin lies, but I had the tapes. I had time. And this time I had nothing left to lose. The door opened again near dawn. A nurse came in quietly, checking my vitals. "How's the pain, Ms. Weston?" she asked softly. I met her eyes. "Manageable." She smiled faintly. "You're strong." "No," I said, "just tired of being afraid." She didn't reply, but the look in her eyes said she understood. When she left, I turned the watch over one last time before setting it back on the table. My reflection stared up from the cracked glass, tired, pale, but alive. For the first time, that felt like victory. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, the city felt different. The autumn air carried a bite sharper somehow, as if the world itself had been reset. Marcus drove me home in silence, the radio low, the tires hissing on wet asphalt. When we stopped in front of my apartment building, he turned to me. "You're about to find out how deep this goes," he said quietly. "Are you ready for that?" I looked out the window, watching rain slide down the glass. I don't think I've ever been ready for anything that's happened to me, but I'm going to finish it. He nodded, and that was all. For the next few days, I barely slept. The stitches pulled whenever I bent, a constant reminder of what survival cost. But the pain didn't matter. It kept me awake, alert. I began sorting through every piece of information I'd collected over the past year: emails, account logs, meeting notes, voice memos. Marcus had arranged for Detective Bloom and a private investigator, Nina Flores, to come by on Monday morning. When they arrived, I could tell immediately that Nina was not someone who wasted time. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm confidence that made you believe she already knew the ending. "Ms. Weston," she said, shaking my hand. "I've been briefed. You kept good records. That's rare in cases like this." "Habit," I said. My father believed documentation was a form of truth. She smiled faintly. "Smart man." We spread everything across my dining table. The evidence looked overwhelming. Stacks of printouts, flash drives, handwritten notes. Detective Bloom leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching as Nina connected her laptop to my files. "Gregory Holt's been busy," Nina murmured. "He's set up 3 shell companies registered in Florida, each under different names: Horizon Pathways, LLC, Bell Tower Holdings, and Ladera Capital. All share the same mailing address, a virtual office suite. He's been transferring capital from the Weston Heritage accounts into these entities for the last 18 months. How much, Marcus asked. "Close to 4.7 million, she said. "And that's just what's obvious. He's disguising some transfers as vendor payments. Classic laundering pattern." Bloom scribbled notes. "Your mother's name shows up anywhere." "Unfortunately." "Yes," Nina said. She co-signed several authorization forms for loans using hotel property as collateral. Most likely, she didn't understand what she was signing, or she did and didn't care. My stomach twisted. He used her as cover. "Exactly," Nina said. "But that means she's complicit on paper." Marcus leaned back. That'll matter in court. We can show he manipulated her, but it won't erase her signature. I don't want to erase it, I said quietly. I just want the truth. Nina glanced at me. Truth is messy, Clara, but we'll get as close as we can. We worked for hours. Every time we uncovered something, another layer appeared. Gregory's empire wasn't just built on fraud, it was built on precision. Offshore accounts, dummy invoices, fake consulting fees. It was like unraveling a spider's web. He's good, Nina admitted, smart, methodical, but he made one mistake. She clicked through the document and turned the screen toward me. See this? A signature dated 2 days after the stabbing. He authorized a transfer while you were in the hospital. That proves intent and opportunity. He wasn't acting out of panic. He was following through on a plan. The realization made my blood run cold. Even after nearly killing me, he had kept stealing. I stared at the document, my father's company name printed in black ink beneath a stranger's forged approval. He thought I was gone, I whispered. He didn't think I'd wake up. That arrogance is what will sink him, Bloom said. Men like Holt always underestimate the people they hurt. The hours blurred until night fell. Marcus ordered takeout, but none of us ate much. The weight of the investigation filled the room like a fog. When they finally left, I sat alone, surrounded by papers. The apartment was quiet, except for the rain tapping against the window. I picked up my father's pocket watch from the table, turning it over in my hand. The crack across the glass caught the lamplight like a lightning bolt. You built something honest, I said aloud. Now I have to rebuild what they ruined. The next morning, I drove to the Heritage for the first time since leaving the hospital. Marcus wanted me to stay home, but I couldn't. I needed to see it to remember what I was fighting for. The staff avoided my eyes as I walked through the lobby. Some whispered, others turned away. The rumor mill had already churned out 100 versions of what happened, but truth always makes people uncomfortable. I stopped in front of my father's portrait hanging near the elevator. The frame gleamed with fresh polish, probably Gregory's attempt at good PR. They can shine it all they want, I muttered. It doesn't change what it means. Upstairs, the office door that used to have my nameplate now bore none. Gregory's had been removed too. The place smelled faintly of old coffee and fear. I took a slow breath and stepped inside. The desk drawers had been emptied, the filing cabinets cleared. But I wasn't looking for paper. I was looking for something my father once told me existed, a contingency file he had mentioned years ago. If anything happens to me, he'd said, there's a folder in the safe. It's not about money, it's about protection. I went to the safe behind the bookshelf, entering the old combination. The door clicked open with a metallic sigh. Inside were 2 things: a sealed envelope labeled Succession Contingency and a photograph of my parents and me at the hotel's grand opening. My father's handwriting covered the back of the photo. Legacy is earned, not inherited. My throat tightened as I opened the envelope. Inside was a signed document, an agreement drafted years earlier stating that in the event of my father's incapacitation or death, any external party attempting to alter ownership without direct board approval would trigger an automatic investigation by a named legal firm. The firm still existed, listed in Houston. A protection clause. My father had thought of everything. My pulse quickened. This was the missing piece. I took photos of every page and sent them to Marcus immediately. His reply came seconds later. This changes everything. We can freeze the accounts. I sat down in the empty chair behind the desk and stared at the city skyline through the window. For the first time, I felt something close to power, not the kind Gregory wielded, but something quieter and more enduring. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. That night, I began keeping a written record again. Not for the lawyers, not for revenge, but because I needed to make sense of the story before it consumed me. September 23. I wrote, "They built their empire on lies, but lies are brittle. Truth bends, it doesn't break." The clock on the wall ticked softly, and I found myself smiling at the sound. Time had not stopped after all. It had simply waited for me to catch up. The day of the board meeting began with a strange stillness, the kind that feels like the pause before a storm. I dressed in black, my sides still sore, but my resolve sharper than ever. Marcus picked me up outside my apartment, his briefcase balanced on his lap, his face unreadable. "This is it," he said quietly as we drove toward the hotel. "You understand what happens once we show them the evidence." "I understand," I replied. "They lose everything they stole." The Weston Heritage stood tall against the morning sky, its glass windows reflecting the pale light. It looked untouched from the outside, but I knew the rot beneath its surface. The boardroom was on the top floor, a space my father once called the heart of the company. It smelled like leather oak and anxiety. When we stepped in, the chatter died instantly. Gregory sat at the head of the table wearing a navy suit and a smug smile that barely hid his irritation at seeing me upright. My mother sat beside him, her posture perfect, eyes darting nervously between us. Around them, 8 board members murmured, most of them loyal to the paychecks Gregory had been feeding them. I took my seat at the opposite end, placing the cracked pocket watch on the table before me like an anchor. "Clara," Gregory said smoothly, "you look well. I wasn't sure you'd join us." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "You called this meeting to discuss my removal from the board, didn't you?" He smiled thinly. "I prefer to call it a reorganization. You've been through a lot. It's time for leadership that can move the company forward." He turned to the others. "We're here to formalize the vote. Any objections before we begin?" I lifted my hand slowly. Just one. Marcus leaned over and pressed play on a small speaker he had placed in the center of the table. Gregory's own voice filled the room, cold and clear. "If she doesn't sign, I'll make her bleed." The words echoed against the mahogany walls. Silence fell like a weight. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Gregory's face turned pale. "That's out of context," he stammered. "You're twisting." I cut him off. "You already did." My voice was calm, steady. "You twisted everything my father built into something dirty, something cruel. But you forgot something. Buildings hold truth longer than people. And this room remembers who it belongs to." I gestured to Marcus, who handed out folders to each board member. Inside were copies of the contingency documents from my father's safe, the financial transfers to Gregory's shell companies, and the loan forms my mother had co-signed. "These are the facts," Marcus said firmly. "You're all experienced enough to know what fraud looks like. Holt's been using Weston Heritage funds to finance private accounts and personal ventures. The total amount exceeds $4.7 million. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. One man muttered, "Good God!" Gregory pushed his chair back, rising to his feet. "This is ridiculous. She's trying to frame me." "Funny I said that's exactly what you did to my father." He froze, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "He told me everything before he died." I continued, my voice rising with each word. "You and my mother set him up. You made him look incompetent. Forged documents forced him out of his own company. Then you did the same to me. The difference is, this time you got caught." He slammed his hands on the table. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just a spoiled girl with daddy's money and a victim complex." I stood. "You're right. I was a victim, but not anymore." I opened my folder and pulled out the letter from the Houston law firm named in my father's contingency clause. "By this document, Weston Heritage Holdings is now under internal legal review. Any attempted transfer of authority is frozen pending investigation. That includes your position, Gregory." The blood drained from his face. "You can't. I already did." Marcus nodded to Detective Bloom, who stepped into the room from the hallway with 2 uniformed officers. "Gregory Holt," she said, her tone all business. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, attempted murder, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The board members erupted in whispers. Gregory took a step back, then another, his face contorted with disbelief. "You can't do this!" "Evelyn, say something." My mother's lips trembled. "Gregory," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow, distant. The officers moved closer. He turned toward me, his eyes blazing. "You think this fixes anything? You think taking me down will make you whole?" "No," I said softly. "But it will make the truth whole again." He lunged as if to speak, but the officers restrained him. The sound of handcuffs clicking was like punctuation at the end of a long, painful sentence. My mother sat frozen, staring at him as they led him out. For a moment, she looked small, almost childlike. When the door closed, silence filled the room again. No one seemed to know what to say. Marcus gathered the remaining documents. "I believe the agenda for today has changed," he said dryly. One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Ms. Weston, on behalf of the remaining directors, I think we owe you an apology." I shook my head. "No apologies, just honesty from here on." My mother stood slowly, her voice shaking. "Clara, please, you have to understand I didn't know he'd go that far." I met her eyes. "You signed every paper, Mom. You just didn't read what you didn't want to see." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. "You made your choice," I said quietly. "Now I'm making mine." I turned to the board. "Effective immediately, I'm reinstating my role as managing partner. Marcus will oversee the transition and audit. Anyone who helped Gregory cover this up can either cooperate with the investigation or face the same charges." No one argued. They only nodded, the sound of submission filling the silence. As I gathered my things, my eyes fell on the pocket watch lying beside my notes. I picked it up, running my thumb across the cracked glass. The hands were still stuck at 7:48, my father's time. My time had stopped that night too, but not anymore. "Meeting adjourned," I said, and walked out. In the hallway, the hotel air smelled different, cleaner, like the moment after a thunderstorm. Employees watched as Gregory was led past them in handcuffs. No one spoke, but their eyes said everything. Justice had finally walked through those doors. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting gold over the marble floor. For the first time in years, the Heritage didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt alive. Marcus joined me by the elevator. "You did it," he said quietly. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the boardroom through the glass wall, the place where my family's empire had nearly died, and where I had finally taken it back. My reflection merged with my father's portrait hanging beyond the corridor, and for a brief second it looked like we were standing side by side. The elevator doors sealed shut with a soft chime, carrying me downward into something that almost felt like peace. The courthouse in downtown Austin was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. Marble floors echoed under the click of heels, murmurs of journalists filled the hallways, and flashes from cameras burst like lightning whenever I passed. I hated the attention. I wasn't there to be a story. I was there to end one. The trial had taken months to reach this point. Gregory's lawyers had tried every tactic motions to dismiss delays for health reasons, endless objections. But the evidence was too solid, the recordings too damning, and the financial records too precise. The prosecution called it a case of greed disguised as governance. I called it what it was: a betrayal written in blood. On the morning of testimony, Marcus met me outside the courtroom. He looked sharp in his navy suit, calm as ever, though I knew he'd barely slept. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'll do it anyway." He smiled faintly. "That's the right answer." Inside the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Gregory sat at the defense table in a tailored suit, his expression carefully rehearsed into one of humility. His lawyers had coached him well. Slouched shoulders, faint remorse, a bandage from a self-inflicted accident to gain sympathy. But I saw the flicker of rage beneath the surface. My mother sat behind him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, face pale. She wasn't a defendant, not officially, but she was under investigation for conspiracy and perjury. When our eyes met, she looked away. The judge entered, and the murmuring stopped. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The state of Texas versus Gregory Holt." The prosecution began by outlining the charges: attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, falsification of records. Each count sounded like another brick in the wall closing around him. Then they called me to the stand. My legs felt heavy as I walked forward. The courtroom lights were hot, my palms slick with sweat. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down. The prosecutor, a woman named Dana Reese, approached with a steady calm that immediately grounded me. "Ms. Weston," she began, "can you describe your relationship to the defendant?" "He's my stepfather," I said. "He married my mother after my father died." "And what was your role in the Weston Heritage Hotel?" "I was managing partner. My father left me majority ownership in his will." What changed after Mr. Holt entered the company? I exhaled slowly. "Everything." He began consolidating power, excluding me from meetings, changing passwords, creating shell companies. When I resisted, he tried to take full control. Dana nodded, walking toward the evidence table. Let's talk about the night of the first incident. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector displayed an image of the hotel dining room cordoned off with police tape. What happened that evening, I swallowed hard. He told me the board had approved him as acting president. I told him he had no legal authority. He called me a spoiled girl and said if I wouldn't give it, he'd take it. I paused, feeling my throat tighten. Then he stabbed me. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Dana continued gently. And your mother? She watched. I could hear the scribbling of pens, the clicking of cameras, the sound of public judgment. Ms. Weston Dana said after that incident, "Did you recover evidence of Mr. Holt's financial crimes?" "Yes," I said. "I recorded conversations, collected documents, and found a contingency file my father left. It contained proof of a protective clause against unauthorized ownership transfers." She nodded. "And what did those recordings capture?" Marcus stood in the back, his gaze steady on me as the audio clip played through the speakers. Gregory's voice filled the courtroom again. "If she doesn't sign, I'll make her bleed." The sound made me shiver, even though I'd heard it a dozen times. The room went silent when it ended. Dana looked at me. "Is that Mr. Holt's voice?" "Yes." "Did he follow through on that threat?" I met Gregory's eyes. "Yes, twice." A few jurors flinched. Dana turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state moves to admit Exhibit D audio evidence of intent and premeditation." The defense objected, but the judge overruled. Admitted. The rest of my testimony blurred into procedural detail, bank accounts, signatures, false loans. But every word felt like stitching a wound closed. When I stepped down, the air felt lighter. Gregory's attorney, a slick man named Phelps, stood for cross-examination. He smiled like he thought I might break. "Ms. Weston," he began, "you've been through significant trauma. Is it fair to say your memory might be affected?" "No," I said. "Some things you don't forget." He circled the stand. "You claim my client attacked you twice, yet you attended a dinner he organized after the first incident. Why would you willingly meet with a man you say tried to kill you because he was my mother's husband?" I said evenly. "And because people like him count on you wanting to believe they've changed." His smile faltered. "You have a history of emotional distress, don't you? Medical records show anxiety treatment after your father's death." I leaned forward. "I had anxiety because men like him were trying to erase everything my father built. That's not instability, that's awareness." The jury stirred. Phelps frowned, flipping through his notes, but the damage was done. When I left the stand, I caught my mother's eyes again. She was crying silently, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or self-pity. The trial lasted another week. Witness after witness testified, employees who'd been silenced, accountants who uncovered forged invoices, even Carl Gregory's nervous assistant, who admitted he'd been ordered to change financial statements. By the time Detective Bloom presented the final forensic report, tracing offshore transactions back to Gregory's personal accounts, the outcome was inevitable. During closing arguments, Dana Reese stood before the jury, her voice steady. "This case is about more than money. It's about a man who believed power excused cruelty. It's about a woman who nearly died because she refused to be silent. And it's about the truth which survived even when she almost didn't." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the room went completely still. "We find the defendant Gregory Holt guilty on all counts." My mother gasped audibly. Gregory stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The judge's voice was firm. "The court sentences the defendant to 25 years for attempted murder, 10 years for financial fraud to run concurrently." He banged the gavel. It was over. The sound echoed through me like a door closing on a long, dark corridor. Gregory turned once as the bailiff took his arm. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I looked him in the eye. "I already did, a long time ago." They led him away, his footsteps fading into the hallway. My mother sank into her seat, trembling. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions, but their words blurred into noise. Marcus guided me outside, shielding me from the flashes. We stepped into the sunlight, the courthouse steps gleaming like a stage. "It's done," he said quietly. "Justice doesn't undo the pain, but it evens the scales." I nodded, the wind tugging at my hair. It's not about revenge, I said. It's about remembering who I was before all of this. Across the street, the clock tower struck noon. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the watch. The cracked glass caught the light, and for the first time I thought I heard something faint inside one small, stubborn tick. Time moving forward again. The days after the verdict felt unreal, as if the world had slowed to a cautious rhythm while I relearned how to breathe. Every newspaper in Texas ran the story, "Heiress Survives Family Betrayal." Some called me brave. Others called me a scandal. I didn't care about either. I stayed inside my apartment blinds, half closed, watching the city through narrow slits of light. The phone rang constantly, reporters, talk shows, relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting a piece of the story. I said no to every one of them. I didn't want my pain turned into entertainment. I wanted silence. Marcus understood. He handled the press, the legal settlements, and the corporate chaos left behind. Gregory's assets were frozen, his name scrubbed from every hotel document. My mother had disappeared from public view, living quietly somewhere in New Mexico while the investigation into her part of the fraud continued. I couldn't bring myself to visit her. She'd called once, left a voicemail that began with, "I never meant for this to happen," and ended with muffled sobs. I deleted it. Some bridges are too burned to rebuild. One morning, I walked through the lobby of the Heritage before it opened. The floor shone like it always had the smell of lemon polish thick in the air. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. The same marble that had witnessed everything, the arguments, the lies, the blood, seemed to echo differently now. I found myself standing in the private dining room where it had all begun. The table had been replaced, the walls repainted, but I could still feel it, the silence that came after his knife, the way time had stopped when the watch hit the floor. I stood there for a long time, tracing the grain of the new table with my fingertips. "You took back the room Marcus had told me the week before, but you don't have to carry the rage." I whispered it aloud now. I took back the room, not the rage. It felt truer the second time. Later that afternoon, I met with the remaining board members. They'd called an emergency session to discuss restructuring. Most of them were older men, polite but uncomfortable in my presence. They apologized again, said they'd been misled, said they'd believed Gregory's lies. I didn't let them finish. "What's done is done," I said. "We can rebuild, but it has to be built on transparency this time." They nodded, relieved that I wasn't looking for vengeance. But deep down, I knew vengeance wasn't what I wanted anyway. I wanted restoration. After the meeting, Marcus caught up to me in the hallway. "The press will calm down soon," he said. "We'll keep your name out of interviews as much as possible. The focus will shift to the company's future." "Good," I said. "Let them talk about the business, not the blood." He studied me for a moment. "You've changed." "I had to. That's not always a bad thing." He smiled gently. "You know the employees have been asking about you. They want to see you back on the floor." The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. The Heritage had always been more than a company. It was a living thing held together by the people who believed in it. The next morning, I came in before dawn wearing jeans and a plain blouse instead of a suit. I walked through the kitchen greeting staff as they prepared breakfast service. Some of them looked surprised, others just smiled shyly. "Good morning, Ms. Weston," one of the housekeepers said. "It's good to have you back." "It's good to be back," I replied, and I meant it. By mid-morning, I had a stack of letters waiting on my desk. Some were from guests, others from employees. One, written in shaky handwriting on hotel stationery, read, "We never stopped believing in you." I held it for a long time before tucking it into the drawer with my father's photo. That afternoon, Marcus stopped by with an envelope. "The DA's office finalized the restitution order," he said. "Funds from Gregory's seized accounts will be returned to the Heritage. You'll have full operational control again." I nodded slowly. "And my mother probation finds community service. The court took her age into account. She's cooperating." "Good for her," I said, though my voice felt hollow. He hesitated. "Do you want me to forward her letters when they come?" "No." "Not yet." The conversation drifted to other things, the restoration plans, the staff bonuses, the PR cleanup. But my mind wandered back to the empty house I grew up in, the sound of my mother's laughter echoing through its rooms like a ghost. That night, I couldn't sleep. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, looking down at the city lights flickering along the river. The skyline glowed golden against the dark reflections shimmering like memories I couldn't let go of. For years, I'd lived inside their story, the perfect family, the powerful father, the charming stepfather, the dutiful daughter. But stories like that only hold until someone tells the truth out loud. I wasn't the same woman who'd sat bleeding on that marble floor. I wasn't the same daughter who kept hoping her mother would choose her. I was something else now, someone who had lost everything false and found something real in the wreckage. The next day, I attended a small staff gathering. They'd set up coffee and pastries in the conference room, laughter echoing off the walls for the first time in months. Mr. Langford, the maintenance manager who had once told me my father would be proud, raised a cup toward me. "To Miss Clara," he said, "for reminding us what the heritage really stands for." The room clapped softly, and for once, the sound didn't make me want to disappear. When the gathering ended, I lingered behind, walking through the quiet halls. I stopped at the spot near the elevator where my father's portrait hung. Someone had added a small brass plaque beneath it. It read, "Integrity is the foundation." I smiled. That was something he would have said. As I turned to leave, the reflection of my own face caught beside his in the glass frame. Two Westons generations apart, finally sharing the same space and peace. I walked outside into the warm afternoon light. The air smelled like rain about to fall, the sky wide and bright over the hills. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, letting the wind carry away everything that didn't belong to me anymore. The rage, the fear, the betrayal. What remained was quiet and steady, like the heartbeat I'd almost lost. Some stories don't end with fireworks or forgiveness. Some end with a simple truth. Survival itself is a kind of victory. 6 months after the verdict, the Weston Heritage Hotel reopened under a new name, the Lantern by Weston. The rebranding wasn't a marketing trick, it was an act of transformation. The building that had witnessed deceit, betrayal, and blood needed light. I wanted it to be more than a hotel again. I wanted it to be a place where people could feel safe, seen, and welcome. Standing in the grand lobby that morning, I could hardly believe it was the same place where I had almost died. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, but everything else was softer, warmer. The scent of jasmine candles replaced the harsh perfume of corporate sterility. A fountain murmured quietly in the corner, its rippling sound masking the ghosts of old arguments. Guests began arriving just before noon, smiling unaware of the history embedded in the walls. That was exactly how I wanted it. The past would always belong to me, but the future belonged to the people walking through those doors. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, Marcus stood beside me reading a short statement on behalf of the board. "The lantern stands as a symbol of renewal," he said, his voice steady, "built not on fear, but on integrity." When it was my turn to speak, I looked at the crowd, employees, journalists, guests, and a few loyal friends who had stuck by me through everything. My heart pounded, but my voice was calm. "Light doesn't erase darkness," I said. "It makes it visible. That's what this hotel will do. We'll honor what came before by building something honest." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was sincere. I felt my father somewhere in that moment, like a quiet wind moving through the atrium. Later, as the ceremony ended, I walked alone through the hallways. Every room had been redesigned around the idea of illumination. Soft amber lamps, lantern motifs in the decor, even hand-etched quotes from local artisans about resilience and grace. Outside, we had installed a row of lanterns along the garden path, their lights flickering gently in the breeze. The first night I saw them lit, I cried. Marcus found me there, standing under one of the lanterns. "You did it," he said. "It's beautiful. It's peaceful," I replied. "That's better." He smiled. "You know, most people would have sold the property after everything you've been through. Most people didn't grow up in these halls," I said. "My father used to say buildings remember the hands that built them. I couldn't let it remember only pain." He nodded quiet for a moment. "The Lantern Foundation paperwork went through," he said. "Your nonprofit is officially registered." Hearing it out loud made it real. The Lantern Foundation had been my new project to fund to support survivors of domestic violence and workplace abuse in the hospitality industry. I had pledged a portion of the hotel's profits to it. "We'll start small," I said. Workshops, legal aid, mental health support, maybe even scholarships. You're turning trauma into structure, Marcus said softly. That's how you win. I looked out over the garden. No, that's how I heal. Over the following months, the lantern became more than a hotel. It became a story people wanted to believe in. Guests left notes at the front desk about how calm they felt staying there. Couples got engaged under the lantern path. Employees told me they finally felt proud to wear the Weston name again. The air inside the building shifted from tension to trust. I spent my mornings in meetings, my afternoons on site, and my evenings walking through the garden, listening to the lanterns hum softly in the wind. They weren't just lights, they were symbols, tiny guardians of memory and hope. Sometimes late at night I'd find myself in the office looking through old ledgers. Gregory's name had been erased from every record, but I left one file untouched, a reminder of what corruption looked like. Beside it sat my father's photo and the silver pocket watch now repaired. I had taken it to a craftsman downtown months earlier, and when he'd handed it back, it had ticked again for the first time in years. Its steady rhythm filled the quiet moments when doubt crept in. On the 6-month anniversary of the reopening, we hosted a charity gala in the ballroom, the same space where Gregory had once humiliated me. I walked through the doors wearing a simple navy gown, not as a victim, but as the woman who had outlasted them all. The room shimmered with soft light, the chandeliers reflecting gold against the glass. The crowd applauded when Marcus introduced me. To Clara Weston, he said, raising a glass for turning the ashes of the past into light. I smiled, but didn't speak immediately. Instead, I looked at the employees lined along the back wall, the chefs, the servers, the cleaners, the people who had carried the weight of silence long before I broke it. This isn't about me, I said finally. It's about all of us. Everyone who kept showing up, even when it was dark. The room went quiet, and then the applause began again, louder this time. After the gala ended, I lingered in the empty ballroom. The air was warm, filled with the echo of laughter and clinking glasses. I thought of my father again, the way he used to stand at the edge of the dance floor smiling at what he'd built. I whispered, "We did it, Dad. It's finally whole again." That night, I stayed late, walking through every corridor, turning off each light by hand. When I reached the lobby, only one light remained, the great lantern hanging above the entrance. I sat on one of the armchairs, pulled out the pocket watch, and listened to it tick. It felt alive, the sound steady and sure. At some point, Marcus came back downstairs. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Didn't want the night to end," I said. "The silence feels different now." He sat beside me, glancing at the lantern. "You think you'll ever sell it? The hotel?" I smiled faintly. "Some things aren't for sale. This place doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the people who walk through it." He nodded, then looked at the watch in my hand. "Still ticking. Still ticking," I said. Finally. We sat there for a while, the two of us bathed in the glow of the last lantern. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. The sound blended with the ticking watch and the low hum of the night air. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the steady beginning of something honest. The lantern had done its job. It had carried light into every shadow left behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted by the building or the past. I felt part of it woven into its structure like one of the beams holding it steady. Before I left, I turned the pocket watch over and read the engraving my father had added years ago for the hands that keep moving. I smiled, slipped it into my pocket, and stepped outside into the rain. The lanterns along the path flickered softly, lighting the way forward. The first Sunday of spring found me driving west toward Galveston, the horizon stretched out like a memory that refused to fade. The sky was pale blue, the kind of color my father used to say reminded him of clean slates. Beside me on the passenger seat sat the silver pocket watch ticking steadily now, its rhythm stronger than ever. I had promised myself I'd bring it back to him one day. The road wound past quiet fields and wind turbines before opening into the vastness of the Gulf. The cemetery overlooked the water calm and open where the breeze carried the faint smell of salt and magnolia. I parked beneath an oak tree, walked along the stone path, and stopped at the headstone that read, Henry Weston, 1958-2018, builder, dreamer, father. The inscription still caught in my throat every time I saw it. I knelt and set the pocket watch at the base of the stone, brushing off the leaves. "You built walls that stood," I whispered. "I built a life that could." For a long moment, I just stood there listening to the sound of the waves and the faint ticking in my hand. It struck me how much time had passed, not just in years, but in lessons, in scars, in growth. The world hadn't become softer, but I had become stronger within it. My revenge had never been about making them suffer. It was about reclaiming what was mine, the truth, the peace, the pulse that had been stolen. Justice had done its part, but survival, that was the real victory. Behind me, the sea shimmered under the morning light. I could almost hear my father's voice saying what he always did when life got difficult. "Keep it ticking no matter what stops around you." I smiled through tears. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves in the oak, and the sunlight caught the watch just right, sending a glint of silver across the stone. I could have sworn for an instant that the clock's reflection looked like a heartbeat. Afterward, I drove back toward the city, stopping at a small diner off the highway. The waitress poured me coffee, and I found myself watching a family at the next booth. A father helping his daughter cut pancakes, the mother laughing softly. It should have hurt to see it, but it didn't. It just reminded me that some stories end differently. Not all families destroy what they build. Some keep it together even through storms. When I left the diner, the waitress smiled. "You headed somewhere special?" she asked. "No," I said, "just forward." The lantern was quiet when I returned that evening. The staff had gone home, leaving only the hum of distant air conditioning and the faint glow of the hallway lights. I walked through the garden, the lanterns flickering against the dusk. Each light swayed gently in the wind, like a whisper from everyone who'd come before. I stopped at the last one, the oldest, the first we'd hung after the renovation. Its flame wavered, then steadied as I cupped it with my hand. "You did good," I murmured, almost to myself, almost to him. I looked up at the building. Through the windows, I could see reflections of the life I had rebuilt, the front desk clerk arranging fresh flowers, a couple checking, and the faint laughter of a child echoing down the hall. The hotel was alive again, breathing forgiving. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the watch still warm from the drive. The steady tick-tick-tick was the sound of endurance of something surviving the worst night imaginable and still choosing to move. I made my way to the rooftop terrace, a quiet spot we had opened for evening meditation sessions. From there, I could see the city spread out below, lights glittering like stars. The wind was stronger here, brushing through my hair, carrying the faint smell of rain. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I thought of my father and his blueprints, of Gregory's arrogance, of my mother's silence, of every night I'd stared at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. The answer was right here in the hum of the city, in the heartbeat of the ticking watch, in the lanterns swaying gently below. Wholeness wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. The watch clicked again, sharp and clear. I looked down at it, smiling. Time didn't stop that night after all I said quietly. It just waited for me to catch up. My phone buzzed a message from Marcus. "New guest review. This place feels like light." I texted back a single word. "Good." The stars had started to appear now, scattered across the dark like tiny promises. Somewhere down the hall, a musician was rehearsing in the lounge, soft piano notes drifting through the open windows. The melody was tender, uncertain, like the sound of someone learning to live again. I let the music wash over me. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the board about expanding the Lantern Foundation. We were opening a shelter in San Antonio, the first of many. I imagined it filled with women who had escaped their own versions of Gregory, their own battles, their own silences. They wouldn't be statistics, they'd be survivors with new light in their eyes. I knew because I'd seen that same light in mine. As the night deepened, I stayed on the terrace, watching the horizon blur into the dark. The lanterns glowed below like a constellation built by human hands. I thought about all the places my story might travel now, how someone in another state might hear it and whisper, "That could have been me," and how maybe that whisper would be the beginning of their own survival. I picked up the watch one last time before heading inside. Its face reflected the glow of the lanterns, small circles of light moving within the glass like captured stars. "Revenge didn't rebuild me," I said softly. "Truth did. And justice only works if you survive long enough to see it." I slipped the watch into my pocket, turned toward the lobby, and took one final look at the night sky before stepping inside. Behind me, the lanterns swayed again, their flames steady and alive, marking time not as an enemy, but as a companion. Time had been broken once shattered by betrayal and pain, but now it was restored. And this time it was mine. When I left the terrace that night, the lanterns were still burning small circles of light floating against the dark like memories that refused to die. Maybe that is what healing really looks like, not erasing the pain, but learning to walk beside it without flinching. When I first woke up in that hospital room, I thought justice would fix everything. I thought a verdict could make me whole. But the truth is, justice can only draw a line. It cannot fill the silence that follows. That part is up to us. Every scar, every sleepless night, every whispered memory becomes a map leading back to ourselves. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've sat in a quiet kitchen staring at the phone wondering how someone you loved could become the person who hurt you most. Maybe you've replayed a single sentence a single night until it wore grooves in your heart. I've learned that survival isn't just about breathing, it's about reclaiming the space they tried to take from you. It's standing again, even if your hands are shaking and saying, "This is mine, my story, my time." If you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed by the people meant to protect, you know that you're not alone. Thousands of us carry those same invisible bruises. But every time we tell the truth out loud, the weight shifts a little. The darkness loses a fraction of its power. So tonight, wherever you are, maybe in Oklahoma or Florida or somewhere near the edge of the Pacific, tell me your city below. Tell me how far courage travels. I want to know where the light reaches when one person dares to keep the lantern burning. Because maybe your story isn't over yet. Maybe you're just between chapters waiting for the moment when your own watch starts ticking again. And when it does, don't rush it. Let it beat softly like forgiveness you don't owe anyone but yourself. That's the real ending. Not revenge, not applause. Just the quiet realization that you made it through. So, if you're still here, still listening, drop a comment, share your story, and remember, this time isn't our enemy. It's our witness. And as long as it keeps ticking, there's still a chance to rebuild the life that was stolen. Light your lantern. Let someone else see it. You never know who might find their way home because you refused to let yours go out.